there could not have been a more appropriate and in fact a more compulsive occasion than the present one to organize this day-long workshop on the Make in India program of the government. And the reason is very obvious. The Secretary DIPP just now referred to a series of steps that the government has taken in the last 7 months. More are to follow. But despite all of this, manufacturing remains a major challenge. And this is a reality we have to accept. The last 2 years witnessed an economic slowdown. This year may be somewhat better. The next year may be further much better. But manufacturing across, unless radical steps are taken, continues to remain a challenge. And the challenge of manufacturing is for 2 good reasons. We have the agricultural sector with a lot of underemployment in it. The response to rural poverty and the pressures on the agriculture sector are, there are a lot of people working in that sector have to go out and be absorbed in the services and the manufacturing sector. Manufacturing is where jobs are. And manufacturing is an area where we have still to grow and grow at a much faster pace. We have examples of economies like China. When they grew at a double-digit GDP growth rate, their manufacturing curve was 13 to 14 to 15% per annum. That's the pace at which it has a capacity to grow. We have that potential provided we are to set our house in order. All the reform steps we have taken will be catalysts in that process. But something more has to happen. There is a change across the world. Large countries which were the initial beneficiaries of the Industrial Revolution have suddenly realized that their manufacturing is relatively a higher cost manufacturing. And therefore the pendulum started shifting in favor of economies which mastered the art of low cost manufacturing. And those are the economies which in the manufacturing sector in the last 1 decade have taken the lead. Whether Make in India is made for consumers within India or consumers outside is not so relevant. The principle today is that consumers across the world like to purchase products which are cheaper and of good quality. They hire services which are cheaper and of good quality. And therefore, unless we can condition ourselves with this in mind, our manufacturing sector, despite all the reforms, will continue to face a challenge. What is it that is required in each of the sectors that we are going to discuss today? I won't discuss it sector-wise. There are a few suggestions which I have to make at the very outset of this day-long workshop. The entry point into the manufacturing sector itself has to be eased. Our initial barriers have to be lowered and perhaps even removed. If we keep the doors closed, investment won't come in, it won't trickle in. After we open up and remove the entry point barriers in most sectors, our enabling environment, and this is the enabling environment not only of the central or the state governments, but across the board, has to be eased. the joint ventures, the provisions for transfer of technology, the dispute resolution mechanisms. We have to ask ourselves the question, why is it that each investor is today insisting on international arbitrations where the venue is not India? Is it because our domestic systems have a tendency to interfere too much, even in the domestic tribunals which are created, or the international tribunals which are created for the purposes of dispute resolution itself? The ease of doing business. It's very easy to mention this particular phrase. But in the ease of doing business, what is it that has happened in the last few years that added to the complication of doing business in India? Was it uncertainty as far as tax administration was concerned? Has it not scared investors away? Has it not resulted in close down of plants which were otherwise going to be globally competitive? The legacy of the land law itself is going to add to the complication of doing business. So if you set up an industrial park or a standalone industry or an industrial corridor, the complex procedures that you will have to go through to make land available for industry, which is essential for manufacturing, under the present law is going to be far more complicated and time consuming. So unless we are able to honestly introspect what changes are going to be made in that regime, are we going to add to the ease of doing business itself? We've recently introduced, in addition to the advanced ruling mechanism on tax administration, which was available for foreign investors, for even domestic investors. So even before they spend the first rupee or the first dollar, they are conscious of the fact as to what the tax administration and what the tax liabilities in India is going to be. Our regime has to be competitive. People purchase goods. They don't like to purchase taxes along with it. So unless our taxation regime is internationally compatible, the cost of our product is going to be more. I always, in the context of manufacturing, remember a small story I'd heard, probably most of us have heard it when we were in school, that this is a story of two friends who go strolling into a thick forest. And suddenly they hear the roar of a tiger. So one of them immediately starts changing his shoes and puts on his shoes which will enable him to run faster. So the other one asks him, do you think with these shoes you'll be able to beat the tiger? He says the idea is to beat you and not the tiger. Well, that's the story of manufacturing. Am I in a position to manufacture products which are more competitive in terms of cost and quality than my competitors? And competition is going to be international. So am I going to provide them with a tax regime which is compatible to what they get across the world? In terms of trade facilities, the quality of our infrastructure, the quality of our roads, railways, ports, our custom clearances, the availability of power, the availability of cost of utilities, are we able to provide to our industry at the cost where competition is able to provide or somewhere close to it? Now, if we do none of these, then to have a grievance that my manufacturing sector is not increasing would be a distant dream itself. Therefore, a spate of power sector reforms which have been made in recent months are all intended in that direction. Labor flexibility. And at some stage, we'll have to make a conscious choice Do we need more jobs or do we need more laws? And that's a consciousness which has to come in every section, which is particularly even in those who are friendly to ensure that the labor interests itself are protected. The cost of capital. And I think in recent months or years, this is one singular factor which has contributed to the slowdown in the manufacturing growth itself. The credit offtake is slow. The infrastructure creation becomes slower. The manufacturers find it difficult to afford costly capital because it's going to add to each one of their costs. And therefore, this is one area where each one of us has to be concerned about stability of policy. We can't have a policy which is occasionally changed, and halfway through our businesses, we find that there is a different policy than the one which we had planned. And that's the reason why retrospective taxation, because of the absence of stability of policy, became a defining moment against India globally. And it is these kind of errors from which we really have to learn. Our IPR regime, along with our IPR regime, our concentration on research and development. There are sectors like pharmaceuticals, where we've specialized and gained core competence in generics. But along with generics, our original patents record also has to significantly improve. And our IPR regime has to be tailored in that particular direction. Our entire skill development program has to be expanded, and we need to concentrate on that, and that's one of the flagship programs of this government. Across the country, how to develop skilled workforce amongst the youth so that you have a ready workforce available as far as skill development is concerned. Our project implementation. We have lakhs of crores worth of projects from initial stages through the functional stage, halfway through implementation, where we find some roadblock on account of some factor is being created. Now the project implementation across ministries, across states, across regulatory mechanisms requires to be expedited. And I do believe that where we've lacked in this has been the absence of a shared national vision. And when I speak in terms of a shared national vision, it's not merely between political parties. It's not merely between central and state governments. It's also between various other institutions which have become organs of governance. Therefore, the regulatory mechanisms. And it's a hard reality that today, the judicial institutions, besides administering justice, in some areas, have also become an organ of governance itself. The exercise of power in environmental issues. And therefore, if mining is completely closed in a couple of states, then we must be prepared to accept the fact that will eventually impact on our GDPs also. So the shared national vision has to cut across governments, central and state, and various other institutions which are slowly becoming organs of governance itself. These are some of the steps which we really need to take, one after the other, and it is this corrective action which is required in case we are to really expedite the whole process of manufacturing. Manufacturing is important because otherwise the danger would be that if we lose out on cost, if we lose out on quality, then we will be threatened with a situation where we become a nation of traders rather than a nation of manufacturers. And therefore, it is for this precise reason that in his Independence Day speech, the Honorable Prime Minister gave a major thrust to the Make in India program. This week, we have two major components which are going to add to this Made to India campaign. One is the day-long workshop today, where state government, central governments, industry are all sitting together so that to ensure that we can cut short our procedures, put our heads together, put them in order, and therefore the manufacturing sector can be concentrated to in the weeks and months to come. The result of all this in the manufacturing sector requires patience. It's not a result which comes overnight. And therefore, once we put our house in order, it's going to take some reasonable time where we can see the actual impact as far as the ground is concerned. The second major initiative that the Honorable Prime Minister is taking is the bankers' retreat. Because we need to add to the liquidity in the market. We need to ensure that capital is available. We need to ensure that those sectors of the industry which are today starving on account of funds, we are in a position to provide adequate liquidity to those industries. Killing them as today would at least not be a solution itself. And hopefully, if we succeed in these two initiatives this week with the bankers' retreat over the weekend and the Make in India program at the start of the very week, we will see a much brighter future as far as manufacturing is concerned. Let me compliment the Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion for this great initiative that they've taken today in collaboration with various other departments of the government. And I'm sure today's workshop will be a great success. Thank you.
जेल ज्यादा जाओगे अभी क्या मैं समझे क्या? ये टाइल्स लगा रहे हो, फिर तनख्वाह से लेंगे वापिस पैसा? शर्म करो, शर्म, जनता का पैसा है, ये पूरा वापिस करो। कहाँ से लिया है ये? कौन कंपनी है ये? मैडम, आज हम शासन को रिपोर्ट भेजेंगे कि ये क्या क्या कर रहे हैं आप लोग।